And so we get to part 3, looking at the long-term causes of the Chinese Civil War. The learning outcomes. Essentially what we're trying to do is finish looking at the events that created those changes in society that will make a war more likely, right? Considering our definition of what a long-term cause of war is. And we move on.
After the First Sino-Japanese War, reforms were attempted. The 100 Days in 1898 was essentially one of those. But there was even more desire to reform, basically on the eve of the fall of the Qing Dynasty. And so there was this desire to reform the imperial government because people saw that things weren't working. So the First Sino-Japanese War, 1895, weakened China's bargaining position. And so essentially Japan was kind of an upstart. Japan had historically been in the shadow, we'll say, politically in the region and globally of China. And so once Japan beats China, China is in a weaker position, and now she's making concessions to Japan. Right. And this also weakens her bargaining ability with the rest of the other imperialists as well. Now, then we get to the Russo-Japanese War, which is 1905. And so this was a really big deal, a huge deal globally, because this is what propels Japan onto the international stage. Japan has beaten a traditional European power. And what that means, of course, is now Japan is going to increase her presence in Manchuria. And we know that is going to basically lead to the full-on invasion of Manchuria. So essentially, within this region, Russia is displaced by Japan. So one of the things that happens is it's kind of ironic. Japan begins this process of modernization because they didn't want to be as weak as China. Once Japan, by the time we get to like 1905, numbers, and Japan has beaten a European power, one of the great powers of Europe, a lot of people in China see Japan as a model that they want to copy. Japan industrialized. Japan reformed her military to the point that it was really strong, enough to beat Russia. Japan centralized the government and reorganized society. So now like the government had complete control over all parts of the country. And so people within China want to copy this and produce a strong China. And so in some ways, the imperial government is realizing that they need to kind of cave and do some of this. And so there was a setup of provisional and national assemblies in 1909, 1910. And the whole idea was to, kind of like democracy in a way, let people have an opportunity to have a voice in the government in the direction of the country. And kind of it also as a method for expanding government control, right? The government is there through these assemblies. However, they were all show. They had little political power. And essentially, it's going to be too little, too late.
In the early years of the Republic, China was torn apart by foreign powers. For instance, Guangxi and Guangdong provinces were under the influence of England and Yunnan of France.
Since the 19th century, England, France, Germany, the United States, and Japan had traded with China. They based their interests in the major ports around the country. Most foreigners lived in special areas called concessions, which they controlled with their own local governments.
We didn't have the term imperialism. The term came later. We called them foreign devils. They were devils to us. Why did we hate foreigners? We hated any foreigner, any foreign country that wanted to divide up China. It was called divide up then, not invade. They wanted to divide up China just like cutting a melon into pieces. People used to say, now you want to divide up our country, you foreign devils. You're bastards.
And so what happens is you have the rise of Sun Yat-sen and revolutionary nationalism movement. We'll talk more about Sun Yat-sen in the short-term causes, but this is essentially the end of the imperial government. And this revolutionary nationalism movement believed that saving China required overthrowing the Qing and establishing a republic. Essentially, by the time we get to this point, there is no hope for the Qing Dynasty and no hope for an imperial government because people see that it hasn't been working. So those national assemblies were a day late and $1 short. And the Sun Yat-sen spent quite a bit of time internationally, and he was heavily influenced by Western ideas of like democracy and social justice, and then Japan's impressive modernization. So the idea was to take some of these Western ideas as well as a more Asian model that Japan presented and modernize, become strong. And the revolutionary nationalism movement focused on social justice, and the redistribution of wealth. You'll see some of these ideas later on within Mao's communism. But kind of this idea of, you're not going to have like 70% of the population owning the resources and stuff like that. And give people an opportunity to be able to participate within their society and not constantly be on the losing end of everything.
So we get to the part that asks you to put it all together. So the first thing that you should do is go through all of our long-term causes and organize them by social, political, and economic. This is super important that you do because oftentimes on the exam they ask you to discuss the social, political, or economic. So you've already organized it and you can be ready to go. And then, of course, we haven't actually gotten to the part yet that we talk about the actual Civil War, but considering our definition of what long-term causes are and considering what you know about the long-term causes of war in China, discuss what impact these would have on bringing about a civil war. And then comes the part with the analysis. So which of these do you think would be the most significant and why?
Surprise! Here it is. What do Kermit the Frog and Alexander the Great have in common? This is a mind-boggling history question, but I've got the answer. The same middle name.